Ralph Waldo Emerson. Anybody here read any of his stuff? Some of you do. Yeah, he was one of the grand metaphysicians of his time. He hung out with Henry Thoreau. But Emerson may have said it best when he observed that consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. That idea that you demand everything remain the same, consistent with your previous positions and nothing change, must be the hobgoblin of little minds. And God knows I'm sincere, and I'm sure most of us are, when we say amen to that, what you might call a poetic crucifixion of anal retentive as a way of life. You work with that for a while and it'll come to you. I've been there, and I've done that one for sure. Still do on occasion, because I've found out that hobgoblins die hard. They truly do. One of the classic examples of the kind of unenlightened attitude that is guaranteed to trash serenity is found in the tenacious investment most of us have in defending and perpetuating the collection of ideas we currently embrace as the truth of how it is, with ourselves, each other, and the world we live in. I've got it figured out. Don't mess with my analysis. Embrace my point of view. Viva my status quo, and we'll get along just fine. How we cling to our petrified notions defining how isness should behave in our presence. Even when it becomes distressingly apparent that our beliefs keep getting in the way of our peace and serenity, we still find it enormously difficult to step outside our current points of view and explore the liberating independence of a fresh perspective. Seng Stan, the third Zen patriarch, called that tendency cherishing opinions. Check yourself out to see if you fall into that dynamic of an opinion cherisher. He went on to teach that the Great Way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. He reminded us that liberation does not require great knowledge of esoteric spiritual principles. He only asks that we cease cherishing our opinions. And let's understand that he's not saying have no opinions. He's simply encouraging us to remember that having our opinions accommodated is not nearly as satisfying as preserving our serenity. Can you hear that? It's a teaching identical to the Jesus ethic that encourages us to lay up not for ourselves, where? Treasure on earth. Treasure on earth. The operative word being treasure. Both teachings are encouraging us to be very mindful about falling in the trap of assigning treasured or cherished status, ultimate significance, to anything that falls within our human experience. That includes all the material symbols of wealth and status and all the human behaviors that we have come to value and cherish so desperately. But cherish we do, and pay the price of lost serenity and dark nights of the soul. The intention underlying our tendency to create cherished and treasured collections of appropriate and inappropriate, desirable and undesirable, good and bad, right and wrong, seems evident enough. We're all just taking a run at making a little sense out of this ever-changing flow of form and circumstance that we call our lives. Get it qualified and defined so we can understand it. Tighten down the margins so we can deal with it. Housebreak chaos into consistent patterns of predictable, principled, manageable civility so we're clear on what to cherish and what to chastise. Yeah, right. Ever try that one? I'm sure we all have. Carl Sandburg was hip to the likelihood of that ever bearing any living fruit. He wrote, "We run round in a ring and suppose, while the secret sits in the middle and knows." And we'd better refine our capacity to make friends with the secret. And what does the secret know that we seem to have such a tough time embracing? I've got a hunch that one of its revelations would be an invitation to relax and learn to dig infinity just the way it is, rather than obsess about pruning each moment of it into conformity with some cherished notion about how it's got to be before I'll rest easy in its presence. And let's make sure we are clear here. This is not about giving up every dream you've ever dreamed about how you'd like your time-space experience to shape up, to have some definite ideas about the kinds of creative activity that adds immensely to your joy and your satisfaction. Go for it. Just remember not to assign your earthbound dreams treasure status, which is to cherish them so intensely that you'd sacrifice your serenity if they don't work out. That's the crux of the argument. Remember, the material symbols of wealth and status in and of themselves are not our problem. Lots of folks who are wealthy and powerful within the ego domain of our earth world are also quite compassionate and spiritually awakened. Likewise, there are plenty of ascetics wandering around who don't have a spiritual clue. The problem is not the stuff. The problem is a neurotic pursuit of wealth and influence and status and fame, as they represent the keys to the kingdom of contentment. They don't, and we're learning that. The hobgoblin of little minds that Emerson speaks to evokes for me an image of a being who has painted himself or herself into a corner of philosophical and cultural dogma so rigid they have become essentially unavailable to anyone embracing even a slightly different sense of things. There are no leaks in the margins of their belief systems. Every being or situation they encounter is majored by the cold calculus of an ideology that demands absolute agreement with its points of view across the whole spectrum of human possibility. They are frustrated, hostile, grandiose, arrogant, and scared. They are folks caught up in the human predicament Jesus called the struggle to pour new wine into old wineskins. They are me, they are you, they are us, all of us, every one of us. We've all been there. Some of us are there now. We'll all be there again. The important thing is not to deny it. We've all got work to do. Ram Dass once told me that the toughest part and the most important part of the journey of awakening is to get to the place where we no longer blow smoke up our fannies about how well we are mastering the essential principles of our journey of awakening. Bearing out false witness is a tough spiritual art to master when it comes to the integrity of our capacity for self-evaluation. Breakthrough independence from the hobgoblins of cherished belief systems begins with our willingness to acknowledge that we definitely have some work to do, some stuck points. While identifying them as some of the toughest games in town, it's the only game in town if you've grown tired of hanging out in alternating states of petulance and hostility and disappointment and anxiety and grief and guilt and shame and that whole menu of unenlightened stuff. The key to liberating ourselves from that whole load of useless, unnecessary suffering, and I borrowed that phrase from my beloved Ed Rabel, who was teacher of metaphysics at Unity Village for many, many years until he passed a while ago. He used to talk about every day in class, well, let's discuss useless, unnecessary suffering. That's what he called. That's the inevitable outcome of hanging out in a state of mind that we're discussing here. The key to liberating ourselves from that whole load of useless, unnecessary suffering rests in our willingness and capacity to identify and confront the unskillful use of mind and replace it with a truth that sets us free from all the self-imposed mischief of our unenlightened states. The liberating insight, and that liberating insight is available to anyone spiritually mature enough to move out of the victim fantasy and recognize the empowering truth that all feelings are self-imposed. Nobody makes us feel mad or bad or sad or glad. We do that all by ourselves. Our emotional experience is not ultimately contextually determined. Our capacity to drink the sweet cup of peace, a peace that passes understanding, is totally dependent upon our capacity to mitigate our cherished opinions in the service of that grace. When we become mindful enough to remember not to invest agreement in any conclusion that is not spiritually informed, we will be done with the tribulations of the world, and we will join our brother Jesus in a state of eternal party time. Welcome to the dance. Love you guys. Bless you.